Tonight, there are new indications that President Trump may be preparing to speak to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller. Plus, reports in the last 24 hours reveal that Mueller is strengthening his case against key figures in the Russia investigation. There's a lot to talk about tonight. We've got an all-star panel coming up to break it all down. Jill Wine-Banks, Joyce Vance, and David Corn. But before I get to the three of them, is President Trump preparing to sit down with Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller? Here's a new report tonight from CNN. Quote, President Donald Trump has begun the initial steps of preparing for a possible interview with the special counsel. A White House official and a person familiar with the situation said on Friday, one source familiar with the proceedings stressed the preparation effort is in its infancy. The preparations have been short and informal and included going over potential topics with the president that Mueller would likely raise in an interview, the people said. Now, the president has not formally agreed to speak with Mueller, but this is the clearest sign yet that Trump and his legal team are open to the idea. Also developing tonight, new evidence that calls into question whether a Trump ally may have misled Congress. According to a report from ABC News, Robert Mueller has obtained evidence that calls into question congressional testimony given by Trump supporter and Blackwater founder Erik Prince last year when he described a meeting in Seychelles with a Russian financier close to Vladimir Putin as a casual chance encounter over a beer. Documents reportedly obtained by Robert Mueller suggest that Erik Prince met before and after that Seychelles meeting with George Nader, an advisor to the United Arab Emirates who visited the White House frequently in the early months of the Trump administration. Well, George Nader apparently shared information with Erik Prince about that Russian financier during several encounters, and those sources are telling that to ABC News. Now, that appears to be inconsistent with Erik Prince's sworn testimony before a House investigative panel that the Seychelles meeting happened by chance. And Robert Mueller's office has released a trove of documents related to its case against former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. The documents contain 7 search warrants. One of the warrants for data from 5 AT&T phone numbers was just obtained last month, on March 9th, 2 weeks after Mueller issued his second indictment against Manafort, suggesting that Mueller's team might still be investigating new lines of inquiry against Manafort. The timing of the warrant is also significant in that it was issued a week after former Manafort partner Rick Gates accepted a plea deal with Mueller's team. All right, joining us now are Jill Wine-Banks, former assistant Watergate special prosecutor and MSNBC contributor. Joyce Vance is a former federal prosecutor and professor at the University of Alabama Law School. She's also an MSNBC contributor. And David Corn is the Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones and co-author of the new book, Russian Roulette, the inside story of Putin's war on America and the election of Donald Trump. He's an MSNBC political analyst. Welcome to all of you. Jill, let me start with you. The idea that the president is getting ready to sit down with Donald Trump, as early in the planning stages as that may be, first of all, would that be Donald Trump and his team's decision? And if so, what does that tell you?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting that they're saying it's in its infancy in preparation and that it's short and informal, which is exactly what you would expect from a president who doesn't read and doesn't have a very big attention span. So he would have to be short in order for him to pay attention. And no, it isn't his choice, because if Mueller wants to get his testimony, all he has to do is issue a subpoena, and then he can ask anything he wants. The president would have to then invoke a Fifth Amendment privilege, which he would keep with him. He does not have any other privilege that he could use to avoid answering questions, particularly those that involve his conducting anything that has to do with a crime. There is no protection for that.
Joyce, let's talk a little bit about this. In January, Donald Trump told reporters, and he's told them since, that he would be looking forward to sitting down for an interview with Robert Mueller. Let's listen to what he said.
Are you going to talk to Mueller?
I'm looking forward to it, actually.
You want to? Do you have a date set?
Here's the story, just so you understand. There's been no collusion whatsoever. Yeah. There's no obstruction whatsoever. And I'm looking forward to it.
Joyce, we're about a day out from Donald Trump saying something on an airplane that made Stormy Daniels' lawyer very happy. Donald Trump, if he is going to talk to Robert Mueller, may not want to be telling reporters what he's got in mind.
It seems like the worst possible strategy for someone in his position. It's interesting that we learned this week that the president has been told, or alleges that he's been told through sources, that he is a subject of the investigation, not a target. One of the implications of learning that is that it makes it a little bit easier, as Jill points out, for Mueller to subpoena President Trump. DOJ has a long-standing policy of very sparingly subpoenaing targets to the grand jury, but that prohibition doesn't really apply to subjects. And once he's in front of the grand jury, his team has no control over what he's asked. He can't take a lawyer into the grand jury with him. He has to answer the questions unless he asserts a Fifth Amendment privilege and says, in essence, I can't answer this question because if I answer it, I'll be incriminating myself as a criminal. So this is a real problem for him, but he has foreclosed the option of not testifying, saying that he's willing to go, and we know that Mueller can enforce that one way or the other.
David, let's talk a little bit about Erik Prince, the Blackwater founder, the brother of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, who spoke with great bluster about this meeting in the Seychelles that is now being investigated reportedly in greater detail. Let me tell you what he told Stephanie Ruhle. Let's listen to what he told Stephanie Ruhle and me right after talking to the Congressional Committee.
So you were in the Seychelles. Why should you meet that Russian guy? What was the reason to meet him?
The Emirati guy said it's someone they'd done business with before, and it'd be an interesting guy for you to know because we were both involved in the commodities and energy space. So I had a beer with him. I don't know if he had a beer. He probably had vodka. But
and in that meeting,
and after that, I had no contact with him or any of his colleagues at all. So
did you
really,
know that he was an associate of President Putin's when you met him?
He was described to me as a Russian hedge fund manager.
Let's play this out, David. A Russian hedge fund manager. He goes to the Seychelles and casually meets for a drink with a Russian hedge fund manager who was introduced to him by that Emirati guy who turns out to be George Nader. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, he also gave testimony to the House Intelligence Committee that was, you know, the transcripts were provided to the public. And if you read those, he seems even more arrogant and casual about this than he did in his interview with you guys. You know, no big deal. I was just there. There was, you know, he doesn't mention that this guy, George Nader, who is an associate, it seems, of everybody, from the Russians, the people running the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and of course, you know, people related to the Trump campaign. So it really, you know, if the stories are true that Robert Mueller has testimony from George Nader that he set up this meeting purposefully to create a back channel between the Trump transition at the time and the Russians, Erik Prince is in a lot of hot water. It indicates, or it gives a strong indication, that he lied or didn't tell the truth when he was talking to Congress. And whether you do that under oath or not, as you know, that's a crime. So I mean, I think this is, you know, a very, very significant issue and speaks to the idea of collusion, at least collusion during the transition.
Right, Joyce, we're starting to see a picture here, right? We've got, as David Corn says, we've got this George Nader, who Erik Prince refers to as that Emirati guy, who seems to be like Waldo. Everybody, he's all over the place. He keeps popping up with connections to all sorts of people. We've got Erik Prince, who has a lot of connections to Trump and has been trying to do business with the Trump administration. He wanted to take over the war in Afghanistan. And it looks like these two guys maybe didn't casually and accidentally meet a Russian and American in Seychelles. Put this together for me.
You know, there have been an awful lot of forgotten meetings with Russians or meetings with Russians that weren't very important among people in the Trump camp. I'm sure Mueller has noticed that. And now he has a very interesting hook for learning more about those meetings, because we have Erik Prince, who by all appearances is on the hook for perjury. That's the sort of thing where Mueller may be able to approach him and flip him. That would mean give him sort of a plea bargain where he would get better treatment in terms of sentencing than he would get if he were simply to go to trial or be prosecuted for this crime of perjury. And perhaps Mueller will then be able to use Prince to explain all of these unexplained and forgotten meetings held by so many people in the Trump camp with Russians throughout the campaign.
Jill, let's talk about Oleg Deripaska, one of the Russians who was sanctioned. He is somebody who has ties to Paul Manafort. These have been established. He is the one who was paying Paul Manafort for lobbying work on behalf of the Russian government, and some say perhaps getting some access to the Trump campaign as a result. What do you think about this new development?
I think it's very interesting, but I'd also like to add to the comments about Erik Prince.
Absolutely.
Because anybody who ever believed that that was a casual meeting in the Seychelles, I would like to offer them as a very good investment the 666 building that the Kushners now have, because it was never believable. That was ridiculous. And Deripaska is another contact to Russia. It is another thing that is Manafort and Gates are clearly involved with, and they were very much involved in the Trump campaign, so that we're looking at not just obstruction, we're looking at collusion. And I think that the evidence is growing on both of those cases.
Joyce, I want to ask you about this. Randall Eliason, who teaches white-collar criminal law at George Washington University, writes about the Rosenstein memo this week authorizing Robert Mueller to look into Manafort's business dealings. Obviously, Manafort is the connection to Deripaska here. It says the memo specifically authorizes a focus on collusion by the former campaign chairman himself. The investigation of Russian ties within the campaign clearly is not limited to more fringe players such as George Papadopoulos or the ever-surprising Carter Page. The Rosenstein memo means the FBI had a basis to suspect Russian collusion involving the very highest levels of the Trump campaign. The reason I ask you this, Joyce, is because this gets interesting. When people look at the indictment against Paul Manafort, a lot of people say, hey, it's a lot of money laundering, not disclosing business interests, maybe tax evasion, but it doesn't actually look like collusion. Now the pieces are starting to fall into place that Paul Manafort, Oleg Deripaska, and a lot of money changing hands.
It looks like Mueller has been circling the whole time, bringing in various players and pieces of this investigation, but never losing sight of the fact that what he's really investigating is whether or not there was Russian interference in the U.S. election, and if so, whether there were people in the Trump campaign who were involved. It begins to look increasingly like there are players who are very close to the president himself, who had relationships with people in Russia, who were enmeshed with them for business or other purposes. There are all sorts of allegations, from the NRA receiving Russian money to Russian oligarchs who were funneling money into campaigns using straw contributors, people in who are American citizens to whom they funneled money. So it's very interesting to watch this all come to the middle with Manafort, who increasingly now there is evidence that he was directly involved with oligarchs, that he was involved in the creation of back channels, that he was present when meetings were held with Russians. And at the end of the day, these complaints that we've heard so far from many people that Mueller is well beyond his jurisdiction are going to be put to rest.
Right.
We look at that memo that Rod Rosenstein wrote, and as Paul Fishman, the former U.S. attorney in New Jersey, pointed out yesterday, there are two little sentences that follow the grant of jurisdiction from Rosenstein to Mueller as regards Manafort. And the second one ends with a semicolon. And then the rest of that memo is blacked out. So there's more about Manafort than what we actually know at this moment that Mueller's been given authority to investigate.
Joyce Vance, thank you for your analysis tonight, as always.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.